A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Welcome back, folks. Hope everybody's having a wicked week here so far. It's minus 46 here with the wind chill, so it's wonderful, wonderful times. Now, my next little tale here, we're gonna touch base on Fort Kent, Alberta. Now, Fort Kent is a little hamlet in central Alberta. Now, this is within the municipal district of Bonnyville, Alberta, number 87, located on Highway 28, and it's 32 kilometers southwest of Cold Lake. And there's always some spooky shit in different towns, and everywhere you go, everybody has stories from around their hometown, or maybe towns that they visited over the years. And a lot of stuff comes through history and all that, so a lot of stuff gets talked about, and it gets passed down. Now, there's some scary stuff that usually gets talked about over bonfires, moonshine, all that shit. And they do get passed around from people that heard it, so they stay in circulation. Now, sometimes these can be exaggerated, maybe the story happened to a storyteller himself. And it's my job here to try to keep you guys in the loop, so let's begin. Tale goes, back in 1921, there was talk of a mythological creature that could possess the minds of men, make them go mad with grief, despair, and it could twist their minds around and make them do unthinkable acts. A man named Thomas Burton had visited Fort Kent back in 1921 with his wife. Now, the doctor was called in to treat a smallpox outbreak that swept through the small community. The young doctor was very successful at helping the townsfolk. He got rid of the disease, and he was pretty much a hero amongst the townfolks. He was praised as a miracle worker by some of the residents. But, alas, that title was withdrawn rather quickly. The disease spread really fast, became uncontrolled, and there were too many to care for all at once. And Dr. Thomas, his wife, had fell ill, and she died due to the disease. Now, this caused the doctor to go fucking mad. He locked himself in his house for days on end, with her dead body inside. During his 4-day breakdown, he consumed the body of his wife, Katie, and emerged from the house covered in blood, and saying that he was possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo. The town at that time consisted of 150 people. Dr. Thomas murdered all but 11 of them. This was before he was seen running into the woods under the cover of darkness. There's a low howl, or low cackle, that can be heard from the woods to this day. It's kind of crazy for a respectful doctor to take such a twist. So I guess nobody's going to go visit his practice anytime soon. And the death of his wife really fucked with this guy's head. To the point that her body was used in a shrine-like ritual. And over the course of those 4 days, he lost his faith in religion. The possession of this guy made him have, total breakdowns and violent acts. Now, Burton had moved through the small town, house by house, attacking with precision, quickness, just butchering people all about. He didn't give anybody a chance to defend themselves. His body parts were taken with him, and the Wendigo spirit here, it possesses the man in a cannibal spirit. Now, it takes over the human as a host for his cannibalistic desires. Regardless, it's type of a supernatural or spiritual being. Now, it has bouts of rage, bouts of insanity, and the best way to stop them is by beheading and then burning their heart over a funeral pyre. Now, that's a structure made of wood for burning a body as a form of cremation. And some tales can be taken with a grain of salt here, real, folklore, what have you, right? There's always something that kind of piques our interests. Now, next up, we'll talk about the Wendigo of Fort Saskatchewan. Now, we're going to go back to 1879 for this one. This one's about a man named Swift Runner, a Native American trapper and a guide who eventually killed and ate his family, all while supposedly possessed by the Wendigo spirit. So, this was back in the 1800s. Now, his name is Kakisi Kuletin. Now, the guy leads like a regular life like us all. He had 6 children and a wife. Well, I mean, that's a little far-fetched. I mean, nobody wants 6 children. Maybe, some people, probably. But it's hard for life back then. I mean, the European settlers moved in, they killed off the buffalo, and this was in an attempt to drive the tribe off their land, which they did, because they wanted to keep the land for themselves. Now, Swift Runner had turned to whiskey for comfort, but this would also get him into more trouble, as alcohol usually does. Now, this caused him to be forced out of his village, smack dab, in the middle of winter. Swift Runner left with his family in tow to go hunt for food. Now, come springtime, he returned alone, telling tales that his family had starved to death and that he lived off the land. Although nobody really seemed to be fooled by his tales, because he looked like a little bit too plump to be famished and malnourished. Now, the priests noticed that he was more heavy-set than what he looked like upon leaving in the wintertime. And there were a few other odd things about the man. They noticed he had screaming fits as he slept, and kind of like he was like trapped in a nightmare. He also began to speak about being possessed by the Wendigo spirit. The priests worried for the man, and they got a hold of authorities. So they began to question him about his family's death, because it wasn't adding up. No, they went back to the campsite where he spent that winter, and to their surprise, the campsite was littered with bones of his family, traces of flesh, and hair was also noticed amongst the remains. Larger bones were found snapped in half, so it's like he just grabbed them and snapped them, right? Upon questioning, he had admitted to killing his family, shooting some, and bludgeoning others with an axe. He even fed one of his sons human flesh before killing him. He was then sentenced to be hung by the neck until dead, and this makes like the only documented case about someone being hung for possession by the Wendigo spirit. Legend about the Wendigo goes as follows. A human becomes a Wendigo after his or her spirit becomes corrupted by greed or weakened by extreme conditions such as hunger or cold. Other names or terms known as the kind of like the First Nations tribes, what they call them. Now, the Wendigo, Windikook, Witika, Achin, Chinu, or Kiwak. Those are just some other variations of the names for the Wendigo. Now, the Wendigo's eyes are described as glowing, kind of like hot coals, sharp and pointy teeth, bad breath, and horrendous body odor. So, I guess he doesn't take really many showers or whatever. He's also endowed with supernatural-like powers, amazing brute strength, stamina, and he uses these to overpower and eat his victims. He also has incredible eyesight, hearing, and a sense of smell. Now, these guys move with the speed of the wind. They're able to move across snow and other terrain like, say, water, open water. And they can do this without sinking. So history goes here that the first European account of the Wendigo was noted by a man named Paul Lejeune. Now, he was a missionary living amongst the Algonquin people in the early 17th century. He made a report to his superiors back in Paris in about 1636. So he spun a tale about a devilish woman who had eaten some tribe members of the, hard to pronounce things here, Attakimguquin tribe that lived north of 3 rivers. So the reports of this stretch as far as anyone could hear throughout the years. Now, as time went on, this was around the 1800s, some fur traders for Hudson Bay Company, they had come into contact with some indigenous leaders. Now, their religious ways and their passion kind of threw them off, so the fur traders kind of thought they were the evil spirit of the Wendigo. The traders described the chief as kind of mad in some cases, so they ended up killing him, and he was suspected of being a Wendigo. Only reason for this is the leader had killed a tribal family. Now, there was no reason for him to do so, so they thought this guy was a Wendigo, and they killed him. And sometimes the traditions behind the legends, like, they serve some importance here, like the creature's way of life and whatnot. And it was also a way to scare kids or tribe members into good behavior. And if not, they'll endure stories of what life in the woods outside the community with the Wendigo would be like. So, like, if they ever left outside or they ventured off in the community by themselves, it was just kind of a way to scare them into good behavior. Now, with the Wendigo being like a cold weather creature, there's a lot more sightings up here in Canada than there are anywhere else. There are some colder states in the United States there that have sightings too, like up in Minnesota way. Next tale, we have two tribe members that were fishing gonna go gather up some food for their tribe. Now, they'd been on their way back to shore, but they ended up getting caught in a very powerful storm. They lost all their strength to paddle back, and they let the wind take them. So they were blown towards a strange island, and even though it was a strange island, it was stable ground, so at least they wouldn't fucking drown on the open sea. Now, they were tired and weary, so they looked for a place to rest their head. Now, they took cover under some bush, and then they heard some rustling not far off in the distance. So they hid behind the bushes, thinking, like, what the fuck could that be? Like, maybe a caribou or some other wild animal. But it wasn't any of that. It was just a huge fucking giant. Now the men froze, strictly out of fear, until the giant had gestured towards the men like, hey, I'm alright, I'm not gonna hurt you guys. He then spoke of promises of food if he followed them back to his cave. Walking around with a huge giant didn't overly sit well with the two men, but what other choice did they have? They were stuck on the island. So upon sitting down with the giant, a Wendigo arrived. He was playing parlor tricks on the men, and it started to corrupt their minds, confusing them, trying to convince them that the giant was going to kill them. But deep down, the two men knew the giant had helped them out to begin with. Now the giant was sick of the Wendigo's tricks. The giant threw down his huge bowl, and then he got really angry. Upon doing this, he yelled the word, dog, and a huge dog appeared, ready to attack the Wendigo. The Wendigo changed its form, and it grew larger in size. The dog took one last leap, and took out the spirit with one swipe of his paw. Now, when sunrise broke, the giant, along with the men and the dog, went to shore, and he placed the two men onto the dog's back, and then the dog ran full tilt into the open water. The dog then took the men to a familiar coastline, and he let the men go. Now the men had a little bit a ways back, so they ended up swimming back. But the dog stuck around with the two men, just to see if they reached shore or whatever, right? Mainly, he kept out of sight so he wouldn't be seen. Now when the men arrived back to their native land, they were questioned on their whereabouts by the chief, but they didn't mention a word of their little tale. Now, many years later, a rustling of wind blew through the trees, and it was almost like someone had summoned the dog. The dog showed up, and he seen the two men that he rescued, and he ended up staying back with the tribe, and making that his new home. And what a nice little tale that was, eh? And lastly, folks, this one here is from Minnesota, and rightfully so, because I mentioned earlier that the Wendigo also comes from other parts of the world. And the funny thing is that this account happened at Lake Wendigo. It's a 199-acre lake in the middle of another lake around Star Island. Now, this baby starts out about a researcher named Carol Crawford. She'd been studying up on the Wendigo stories. She also heard some other tales that a Wendigo lived around these parts in the icy waters of that lake. So she kept her eyes peeled for any exit holes on the water, anywhere that the creature would probably climb out of. And she also kept an eye out for footprints. There was also a tale here about cannibals using the lakeside to boil humans, and they would do this in giant pots. There was also another rumor that a Native American chief had visited the island but he never returned home. She found no trace of the exit holes, no footprints, and no chief. But she decided to abandon the venture because there was no signs of anything really, but all she found was some weird ritualistic ceremonies. And she didn't really want to stick around too long for that to find out the reason behind those. And that's it, folks. That's all my little Wendigo stories here. I want to thank you for tuning back into Twisted Tales. You guys have a wonderful day.
Twisted Tales.